To the left-hand side for Vieira, who'll play it through to Gabriel Jesus, who's in here for Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus to finish it off. Oh, what a way to do it! Gabriel Jesus seals the points for Arsenal. He's back, and he's back with a bang. Into the penalty area it goes. Gabriel's header, and it's into the back of the net. Arsenal take an early lead through Gabriel.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the daily Arsenal podcast with me, Harry Symeou.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Happy Friday. Welcome back to another live edition of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Hope everybody is having a great day so far. Quite a bit to get into once again. It feels like every day is a busy day during the transfer window, whether that's talking about stories that are moving along slowly and we're having to sort of live off the small, sometimes insignificant updates that come our way. Or, you know, you can find yourself very, very busy during this time of year, just putting to bed some really silly rumors. And we've done a bit of that over this summer as well. Hope everyone is good, is excited about the imminent arrival of Riccardo Calafiori. We'll bring you an update on where that move is at a little bit later on in the program as well. Big thank you to everybody who tuned into yesterday's show. We went live, I think, at 6:30 a.m., myself and match commentator Max Jones, to dissect Arsenal's friendly against Bournemouth, a 1-1 draw. Arsenal won the penalty shootout, but I'm not saying Arsenal won on penalties because it was one of those games that was going to go to penalties regardless of the result, because that's just how they do things in some of these preseason games and all the rest of it. Anyway, I am a little bit worse for wear today. I have to admit, I have to hold my hands up. I was at the races yesterday. I was at Sandown Races with some of my amazing colleagues over at Minute Media, 90 Min. For those of you that watch the show, we had a great day. It was fantastic. Party bus to take us to the races. A great day there in the box, enjoying it, eating, drinking, losing all my money, etc., etc. And then we made our way back, and they put on an amazing after party surprise at the office, which we all enjoyed until very, very late. Normally, I'd be fine because I didn't drink that much. But because I'd gotten up at 3 a.m. to watch the Arsenal, then recorded the podcast, then done some radio, and then went straight into central London to meet up with the rest of the gang, by the time I got to about midnight last night, I was flagging. And I'm still feeling it a little bit today. I could have done with a day off today, but it wasn't to be. Obviously, we've got to bring you this podcast daily, but I've also got a radio show coming up a little bit later on this afternoon. And it's my last one on TalkSport 2 for a few weeks on a Friday, because, of course, the Olympic Games are underway and they'll be using TalkSport 2 to broadcast some of those events, which will temporarily replace the show that I'm doing. But we're on air today from 3:15 until 5. Myself and Aston Villa fan and broadcaster Dan Bardell. So that should be interesting. Tune in. I'm sure we'll have some kind of Unai Emery debate at some point. It just always leads down that path. Let me say a few hellos to people joining us in the live chat. I can see there are loads and loads of you joining us live at the moment, which is incredible. If you're watching us on X, because we're streaming this to X right now, why not come over to the YouTube channel and give us a subscribe? Or you can download the Chronicles of a Gooner and subscribe to it, of course, as well, on all the major podcast platforms, which means you'll be able to listen on the go, etc., etc. And I'd really, really appreciate the support. If you're watching us on YouTube, you know the drill. Leave a like on the video. Let's set a like target of 500 likes today. Let's try and get there. And if you're new to the channel or you're not subscribed, in which case, in my book, you're a freeloader. It is completely free, but you're still a freeloader if you're not subscribed. Please do that, because it really, really does help me. And I've been saying for a few days that we're not a million miles away from 35,000 YouTube subscribers, where we're less than 80 away now. So if you could help us get over that line ASAP. That would be amazing. A big good morning to Afsar, to Mr. Ray, who says, the first time I'm catching you live. Welcome to the live stream. I hope you enjoy it. Junior says, good morning, my gooners. And Harry, like the man says, like and subscribe. We've got Hacker with us. We've got Mario Romano. Lots of comments about the Fabian Ruiz rumors, which we're going to address in a little bit. John Daly is with us. He says late again. Yeah, well, that's just the way it is here. That's how we do things. Hacker says, R.I.P. Bordeaux. What a sad story that is. A iconic, historical French football club essentially folding in terms of their professional status. Horrible to hear. How do we even allow things like that to happen in this day and age? I just don't know. We've got Marcelo, we've got Nick, we've got Simbarashe, who's joining us from Zimbabwe. We've got Ticking Time Bomb, who says, is punctuation part of your vocabulary? No, it's not. It's not. What else have we got? AJ Envoy says, Harry probably got in trouble at school for turning up late all the time. No, you know what? The lateness is something that's crept into me recently, I would say. And the reason for that is because I do so many of these podcasts from home. So like you'll be in the living room or you'll be pottering about the house doing something and you'll just go, yeah, I got to be live in 10 minutes, but it's only at the end of the garden. Like it's not difficult for me to get there. Whereas when I go into work, when I travel into work, whether that be to the radio, whatever, I am never late. Ask anyone. I'm never late. But here, it's a little bit different. A little bit more relaxed. Eastside says, hi, Harry, keep up the content. It's time for Eddie and Nelson to leave. If we get Neto, Fabian Ruiz, and Gyökeres, that would be excellent business. I don't think we're going to get all of those guys. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen. Anyway, I've been waffling for long enough. Let's get into today's stories. And we're going to begin with one focusing on a former Arsenal player. I really wanted to touch on this story because I listened to this interview this morning and I found it quite interesting, actually. We'll do that right after this. Okay, so former Arsenal man Nicolas Pepe has been speaking about his time in North London. He gave an interview to BBC Sport, and I've picked out some of the quotes from it, and I've made some notes about what it is that Nicolas Pepe has had to say. Obviously, I can't play you the interview for copyright reasons, but this is some of what Nicolas Pepe has had to say on his time at Arsenal. He sort of cited examples of other players who clubs have opted to overpay for, being then held to unreasonable standards. The names he mentioned were Mykhailo Mudryk and Antony of Manchester United. He said it's not their decision. It's not them demanding 90 to 100 million pounds for the move. This is something that's done between the clubs. It's no fault of the players, but unfortunately that can apply unnecessary pressure, or unfair, I think is a better way of putting it, pressure, and cause problems for that player. This is what he said, and I quote, maybe it would have been different if Arsenal paid 20 million pounds for me. Maybe they'd have spent more time on me, built up my confidence, and prepared me for playing in the Premier League. But the price tag obliged them to use me, whether I was ready or not. That's what I find annoying. So Nicolas Pepe is kind of suggesting that despite the fact that Arsenal paid north of 70 million pounds to sign him, he didn't feel in himself that he was ready for the Premier League and he was ready for that transition. He felt that there was an obligation on the club's part to use him more than was probably right because of the amount of money that they paid for him. And I think a lot of that is valid. The price tag, nothing to do with him. And those who defended Nicolas Pepe during his time at Arsenal would often point to that. And I think that's a very, very fair defense. The thing about maybe Arsenal would have built him up and maybe Arsenal would have spent more time on him and maybe Arsenal would have given it more of an opportunity, that kind of angle that he's going down, I don't necessarily subscribe or agree to that, because the fact that they did pay 72 million pounds, in my opinion, enhances the need to make this work. If I'm a club owner, a coach, a manager, or whatever, and I know that my club have just spent this amount of money on a player, I'm even more desperate for it to work than if I've spent 20 million pounds. If I make a 20 million pound signing that doesn't go very well, the football world's not going to be up in arms, and he's not going to be pointing at that player every single week and every single time that he fails to deliver the expectations. Like, that's just not how it works. The fact that he's a big money signing actually, in my opinion, does the opposite. It does bring pressure, of course, but it also makes it more important for the coach and those around him that they make this signing work. So this idea that Arsenal didn't spend any time in kind of developing him or giving him what he needed, which I know he's not saying directly, but he's kind of suggesting here, I don't really subscribe to that, because I think that actually it's the opposite. If they've paid £72 million for you, this transfer has to work. And so I'm sure they're more likely to change things and do things differently and adjust methodologies and all the rest of it to try and make that work, rather than saying, well, he costs £72 million. We don't need to give him any attention and we don't need to do anything to make this work. It should just work. So, yeah, I'm not really on board with that. He did say this because many had sort of suggested in recent years that he had a bad relationship with Mikel Arteta. It's obvious that Mikel Arteta didn't fully trust him in terms of, relying on him and sort of wanting to build around him. That was clear for everybody to see. He said, I've never had any trouble with Arteta. It's just that he didn't have full confidence in me, which is a shame. But he's somebody I respect, and I know he respects me too. I wish him all the best. That bit was classy from Nicolas Pepe. I really like that bit. I thought it was wise of him to kind of add that in. I think that making that point about sort of the fact that there is no ill feeling between him and the manager is important, because Mikel Arteta would have been in a difficult position with regards to Nicolas Pepe as well. We've just been talking about how clubs would be desperate in that situation to make a signing work. Mikel Arteta, I don't think, found it easy to kind of dismiss Nicolas Pepe. And I'm sure there would have been some pressure from behind the scenes to kind of try and give it one more go and try and make it work. And in the end, Mikel Arteta came to the conclusion that he's not the right guy for us, that it's not really going to work. And eventually he's moved on. But I don't think it would have been easy for Arteta. Like, I know it's easier if you're coming in with a clean slate, and it's easier when it's not your signing. But the fact that he was a £72 million signing put pressure on him, but it put pressure on people at the club to try and get the best out of him as well. So I just think the whole situation was a bit of a mess. We certainly overpaid for Nicolas Pepe. It came back to bite us in the arse, but he's no doubt a talented footballer. And it's a little bit of a shame, actually, the way his kind of career has gone since, I would say. But anyway, let me know your thoughts on that, on Nicolas Pepe. Did we pay too much? Did we make a huge mistake? Is he to blame for it not working at Arsenal? I can see from sort of Junior's comment that he thinks that Nicolas Pepe was responsible in large for not really delivering. He says, no, Pepe, it was your duty to work hard and be consistent. You have to look within. Damien Kelly says Pepe has a weak mentality. Hacker's comment, it's funny, but I'm probably not going to read it on the live pod at this time of day. What else have we got on this? Junior Gunner says Pepe's loan spells at Nice and in Turkey were poor. He wasn't cut out for the level Mikel has us at now, but back then he was decent. Yeah, I certainly thought when he came, he showed some really, really positive signs, like really positive signs. And that's partly why people were so excited. Obviously, you go and spend that kind of money on a player, you break your transfer record, everyone's going to be, delighted and excited and looking forward to seeing it work. But it didn't, and it turned out to be, given what we paid, a little bit of a disaster. Okay, anyway, let's turn our attentions to our next story. Let's move on, and we're going to talk now about Riccardo Calafiori. What's the latest on him? Okay, according to Fabrizio Romano and many others since, Riccardo Calafiori is due to travel to London today. That's where he'll undergo the first part of his medical tests. And then he will fly to the US, where he'll complete the rest of them before joining Arteta and his squad for the remainder of the US tour. Great that this is moving. Great that it's at the point where we're nearly ready to integrate Riccardo Calafiori into the squad. it's not just about the playing time. Obviously, getting to play on the US tour and getting to become accustomed with your teammates before the season in preseason friendlies, all of that is really important, and it really does help, of course. But I think these tours give you a real opportunity to kind of get to know people and bond with people. They're away, they're all together, they're working as a unit, and I think it's a good point to sort of bring new players in and get them singing on the same hymn sheet as everybody else. So this is pretty close. I wonder if, and it is just a guess, I don't know, but I do wonder if him being in London first to complete some of his medical tests also allows Arsenal the opportunity to get the interviews done and all the social media stuff that they need to do ahead of the release of the news that he signed. But we're really, really close on this. And I expect that if he's coming in to do the medical today and they can get some of that stuff done, at some point next week, I'd imagine we're going to get an official announcement on Riccardo Calafiori. The game against Man United in pre-season feels like it's too close. That one is on Sunday morning, so basically Saturday night, really, really late. So I don't think he's going to be a part of the group for that one, but I'm sure he'll play a part in the next one, providing all goes well. That's the latest on Riccardo Calafiori's move. Okay, I want to talk Mikel Merino. We've spoken quite a bit about him in recent weeks. We did a scouting report on him. You can find a link to that in the description of this episode if you want to go back and check it out. We compared him to a former Gunner, Granit Xhaka, who he reminds me of in a lot of ways. He's not exactly the same, obviously, and I said at the time that no two players are exactly the same, but he has a lot of similar characteristics. And I do feel like there's a part of Mikel Arteta that looks back at of course, that point where we allowed Granit Xhaka to leave the club. Now, Granit Xhaka wanted to go, and the club, in my opinion, had done all they could to keep a hold of him because, you know, he was due to leave 2 seasons prior. Like, in his head, he was gone. He's talked about it before. His bags were packed. He was ready. He was going. He was off. All of a sudden, Mikel Arteta kind of cast this spell over Granit Xhaka and sort of convinced him that, no, actually, if I change your role, if I use you in a different way, you can thrive in this team and you can become one of my leaders. And over the course of the next 2 seasons, Granit Xhaka went on to become a really, really, really important player for Arsenal. To the point where when he left, I was worried about how we were going to replace him. There was lots of talk about Kai Havertz coming in and playing in that midfield role. And I think a lot of us had reservations about that from the off because he'd never really played there. Yeah, he'd had 3 roles in behind forwards, but to play as a left 8 in the Premier League, you do need a bit more discipline, maybe positionally, than Kai Havertz wants to have. Now, what I will say to his credit is that when he's asked to do a job, he does it. And he doesn't let you down. He's always in the right places, etc., etc. But we've never really replaced Granit Xhaka in terms of bringing in a natural replacement for him. Now, that's not to say that we need to play whoever comes in that position every single week. There will be games where we can be a little bit more forward thinking and maybe be a little bit more open, where we can play a Havertz or someone a bit more attack minded, a Fabio Vieira or whatever in that area. And you can compensate for having that more attack minded player by having your left back invert and doing it effectively in the way that Zinchenko did before. Mikel Merino, though, would be like us kind of pressing the rewind button and giving us that Granit Xhaka option again, which I do think in terms of our overall weaponry, we are missing. We are missing that more natural 8 on that left-hand side that can give us the balance that we require, I think, in most games in midfield. When we played with Jorginho at the base and Rice as the left 8, it wasn't quite right for me. It was right in certain games because those two could sit together. When we play Partey and Rice, there's a bit more balance because you don't have to necessarily babysit Thomas Partey defensively in the way that sometimes you do Jorginho. But I did feel like, at least for the first half of last season, where we were lacking and where we were struggling with creativity at times was as a consequence of losing our left 8 and not replacing him with a like for like. And also, I think not having that left 8 impacted on our players on the left-hand side, particularly on Gabriel Martinelli, who, when he had Granit Xhaka inside of him, always knew that he could push onto the last man, always knew that he could stay high and wide, and that Granit Xhaka would be alert and aware enough to clean up in behind him if that was necessary and protect him against the transition. Since he left and we started playing Havertz there at first and then Rice there, okay, Rice gives you that defensive cover as well, but is he the progressor that he needs to be? I know he scored a fair amount of goals last season and contributed in that way. People keep pointing to his assists. So many of them were from set pieces, so it's a little bit different. But yeah, I just think getting a player of that profile would do us good. It might not be the way that we go week in, week out, but to have that option, I think will be very, very important. And Mikel Merino is one that's high up on Arsenal's list. He's one that I quite like. And you'll be able to check out the scout report, as I say, and get some more in-depth analysis on him. What's the latest on this then? Well, Fabrizio Romano says that Arsenal have still not presented any official bid for Mikel Merino, as their focus was on sealing the Calafiori deal. He does say that formal contacts for a new midfielder will start in the next few days, with Merino on the list. The fact that he says Merino's on the list, kind of, if you read between the lines, says that there are other options Arsenal are considering as well. We're not hearing a great deal in terms of other names, but if I'm reading between the lines, is Fabrizio Romano saying that actually Mikel Merino is an option, but he's one of a number of options. He also says that approaches have taken place on the players' side. So it goes back to what we were talking about the other day, Arsenal using intermediaries, maybe using personal relationships as well, to gauge from players an understanding as to whether or not they'd be open to a move before going to the club and trying to negotiate. Because as I said before, if you've got the players buy-in, it puts you in a much stronger negotiating position. Is this going to happen? I'm quite confident it will. I think the price works. I think the role that he'd fill is one that we could really do with addressing. And I do think that midfield is a priority area for us this summer. Would I be happy with the signing? Yes, for the value that we'd be getting him at, which is rumored to be around about 20 million euros. That's what Real Sociedad are looking for. If you could get him for that, then this day and age, that feels like a good, smart piece of business. Chris Davison is in the chat. Good to see you, my friend. Hope you're well. Let me just see. He said that he's tweeted something that that's quite interesting about this. Let me have a quick look. Just online right now. My pen's going to roll off the table. What has he said here? Let's have a quick look. So Charles Watts has recently said on his show, brilliant journalist Charles, do give him a follow, give him a subscribe, all the rest of it. We know Arsenal are big admirers of Mikel Merino. The interest is there. It's fully one that I'm expecting them to push on and try and get the deal done now that Calafiori is out of the way. So there's a lot of confidence within Arsenal circles that this one is going to happen. And I'd be pretty pleased with it, as I say, based on what we've been discussing. Okay, time to move on to our final story, and then we're going to do some questions from the live chat. So make sure you start filling up the chat box. If you put a Q at the beginning of each question, it really, really does help me in terms of being able to pick them out and identify them nice and quickly. I can see there are over 1,000 of you with me live right now across the multiple platforms. If you're watching us on X, please do come over either to the YouTube channel, or you can subscribe to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast on all major platforms. And I lost my words there. On all major podcast platforms is what I wanted to say. If you are on YouTube alongside us, leave a like. It's free. It helps. It's really, really important in terms of getting the channel out there. And if you're not subscribed, please do subscribe to the channel, because we are less than 80 subscribers away from hitting the 35,000 mark here on YouTube alone, which is incredible. So please do subscribe. I really, really do appreciate it. Right, moving on to our final story. Duncan Castles says that Arsenal have initiated discussions with Paris Saint-Germain for Fabian Ruiz. The discussions are dependent, I am told, on Arsenal moving a player out in midfield. It's likely if they're to come to an agreement, it will be structured as a loan with an obligation to buy. Okay, so let's break this down. Arsenal have initiated discussions with PSG for Fabian Ruiz. kind of makes sense given that we've been linked with Fabian Ruiz in the past. We were linked with him quite heavily during his Napoli days. I'll give you some thoughts on the player in a minute. The discussions are dependent, according to Duncan Castle, on Arsenal moving a player out in midfield. Now, we heard yesterday that Emile Smith-Rowe is likely now to join Fulham. So that would be your midfielder going out of the door, okay? Which implies that it could be Fabian Ruiz and Mikel Merino. That one transfer in terms of Merino and Ruiz isn't necessarily dependent on the other because we'd be losing a midfielder, and so we need to add. We've also lost Mohamed El Neni, and I know that people will say, well, he was a bit part player and all the rest of it, but it's still a body, right? It's still a midfielder that you could have used in an emergency situation. So I hope that if we do move forward with Mikel Merino, it doesn't mean that we're going to stop there, and that if there's an opportunity to do another bit of business in midfield, that we go out there and we do it, because I think we need it. Duncan Castles also says it's likely that if they're to come to an agreement, it will be structured as a loan with an obligation to buy. Now, Arsenal are in the process right now of moving some players on. And in the instance of Eddie Nketiah, the most likely outcome at the minute feels like he's going to join Marseille. They're going to take him on loan with an obligation to buy, which means we'd be kicking the can down the road, or they'd be kicking the can down the road, I should say, in terms of making that payment. Now, if Arsenal could do a deal leveraging those funds, but also pay it a year down the line, then that obviously means that there isn't an impact in terms of the sort of books, and it works well. Fabian Ruiz, I have to say, was magnificent at Euro 2024. He really, really was. I thought he was great. Brilliant on the ball, strong. The way he would ping balls through the lines and into people's feet, something I was really, really impressed by. And I remember sort of turning to a colleague of mine at the Spain-Germany game and saying, look at him go. Like, look at him just gliding across the pitch and pinging those balls in. What I do think is, and I don't think I always say no two players are the same, but he does tick a lot of the same boxes as Mikel Merino. And that's my one reservation in terms of whether it could be both coming in. The fact that a lot of the skills that one has, you could make the case the other has too. And so would we be better off getting two slightly more different profiles? I don't know. Okay. But that's the first thing I thought of when I saw this. So we know that there's a midfielder potentially leaving. We know that Arsenal are potentially moving other players on in similar circumstances to what we're hoping to achieve with Fabian Ruiz. Move the player on, bring the player in, get him on loan and pay for him later. Okay. So that makes sense. There's no doubt that despite having a really, really good Euro 2024, Fabian Ruiz's stock has dropped since he left Napoli and went to Paris Saint-Germain. He hasn't been great for the French outfit. That's the truth of it. And as a result, I think a lot of big clubs stopped looking at him, or bigger clubs stopped looking at him. Then he goes to the Euros and he performs exceptionally well. And all of a sudden, he's back on people's radars. I would be careful on this one when it comes to how much we'd be willing to pay. I'd be really careful. I remember doing a podcast back when we had Granit Xhaka and comparing Granit Xhaka and Fabian Ruiz and saying, if you think that Granit Xhaka is immobile, if you don't like the way he moves across the ground, if you think that is a problem for him, then you're probably going to say the same thing about Fabian Ruiz if we get him in. And having watched him go to PSG and play the way he has, and even having watched him impress in this Spanish squad, my opinion on that hasn't really changed. Did Arsenal fans generally, did their opinions change on Granit Xhaka? Did people start to think, actually, it doesn't matter that he's not the fastest across the ground because he's very smart, he's very intelligent, and he's very, very good technically? In which case, they wouldn't mind Fabian Ruiz coming in, I'm sure. But there's a lot of similarities between Fabian Ruiz, Mikel Merino, and Granit Xhaka. They are three players that are not identical, of course, but have a lot of the same characteristics. Daniel says he is faster than Xhaka. Maybe he is by a bit, but he's not the kind of midfielder that is going to race up and down the pitch. And, like, for example, Declan Rice is far more mobile than any of these midfielders that we're talking about. I would argue some of these midfielders are better than him on a technical level. But in terms of mobility and getting around the pitch, Declan Rice is leagues ahead of these guys. So you need to think. You need to think about the profiles of these players and how they plug in. It's interesting that we've been linked with him. It's interesting that we're trying to do a deal, if this is to be believed, that would kind of tie in with some of the outgoing deals that we're doing as well. And I'm going to keep a close eye on this one. But what I will say is, as far as I understand it, and it is purely based on what I'm reading and listening to people that are far more knowledgeable than myself when it comes to these things, it feels like the Mikel Merino one is much more likely, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility of us getting both, or at least Mikel Merino and another midfield player. I think this tells us maybe that Arsenal's intentions are to bring in more than one midfielder. And that might mean that we sacrifice bringing in an attacker. They might look at Gabriel Jesus and think, well, Gabriel Jesus is going to be back at it this season, you hope anyway. And maybe that means we don't need to bring in an attacker after all. It's interesting stuff. Really, really is. Lots of moving parts, lots and lots of rumors, lots and lots of stories flying around. And I guess we're just going to have to see how this goes. Okay, time for your questions for the last few minutes of the show. Remember, leave a like on the video if you haven't done so already. If you're watching us on X, come over to either the YouTube channel or you can tune into the Chronicles of a Gooner. Subscribe via all the major podcast stores. Yeah, I will see you after a really brief pause, and then we'll be tackling your questions. Don't go anywhere. Okay, question time. And I've managed to favorite a couple while I was speaking there. Let's see what people are saying. And I won't be able to get through every single one in the allotted time, but I'll pick out a good few. Peyton Carlisle says, "Hey, Harry, keep up the great work." Thank you very much, sir. He says, "What are your thoughts on the Calafiori signing? Would you rather Ruiz or Merino?" If you'd have asked me a year ago, I would have said, or maybe a bit longer than that. If you'd have asked me 18 months ago, I'd have probably said Ruiz. Now I'm kind of leaning towards Merino out of the two of them. If we could get both, great, but I'm kind of leaning towards Mikel Merino. And maybe that's because I've done my scouting report on Mikel Merino and I know exactly what he's going to give us and maybe what he doesn't give us. Or at least I think I know. When it comes to Fabian Ruiz, I haven't watched as much of him at PSG as I did when he was at Napoli. So I'm going to have to go back and study some of his performances, some of those underlying metrics, and come to some new conclusions about him. So on that basis, I have to say Merino at this moment in time. In terms of the Calafiori signing, buzzing. Can't wait for it to be announced, and I can't wait to see him wearing that red and white shirt. Bube says, what happened to Eze? I mean, I don't think our interest in him was ever concrete, was it? Like, it was never reported by anyone that you would say is particularly well connected at Arsenal as far as we're aware. So it doesn't look like we're up for it. And also as well, like, I think that Crystal Palace, having lost Elise, are going to want some serious money for Eberechi Eze this summer if they're to sell him, which probably puts it slightly beyond our reach as well. Carrie says, what do you think about Ben White playing for England again? To be honest with you, mate, I don't care if he never pulls on the England shirt again. Like, as long as he's delivering for Arsenal, we love him, we adore him. He's great for us. It'll be telling though, won't it? Because if after Southgate's departure, he sort of makes himself available again, then that will tell you that there was obviously an issue. If he doesn't, then clearly there's something else to it. And maybe it's just a personal preference of Ben White's that he doesn't represent the three lines. But as long as he's fit and available for Arsenal, I really don't care. George says, when are you having a break? Oh, man, never by the looks of it. I've forgotten what breaks feel like. I did have a bit of a kind of wind down period at the end of the season. But then obviously the transfer stuff picks up and everybody's talking about that and you keep busy. And when you're when you're a freelancer, I don't know about you guys, like I'm sure lots of you that watch or listen are self-employed. And particularly when you've got dependents like I have, you kind of feel guilty when it comes to work coming and you turning it down. I've had days where I've turned stuff down just because I've said no. I've told myself that this is my day off, this is my week off. And then I'll sit there and I'm like, well, what am I actually doing today? Like nothing. And I've got people that I'm responsible for, and I should be doing my absolute maximum to provide for them. Therefore, I should be working. So I always end up feeling a little bit guilty. I never did when I was employed, I can tell you that. But since I became self-employed, it's my mindset's changed quite a bit. Nunandinho says, Harry, what other signings do you think would constitute a good transfer window? I can't give you specific names, but I can give you positions. I thought that left back was a position that needed addressing going into the summer. Obviously, Calafiori's arrival helps with that. Plus, Timber's return to fitness helps with that as well. Midfield has always been the priority area for me, and then one attacker. So if we can get, we've got the defender seemingly in the door. If we could get probably 2 midfielders, I think I'd be completely satisfied. One I'd be okay with, but if we got 2, I'd be delighted. And then if we got 1 attacker, so all in all, I'm looking for about 4 players outside of what we've already done, young goalkeepers, etc., etc. Okay, let's see what else you guys are saying in the live chat. Freedom says, what are your thoughts on Timber? What's his position? He looks unreal. Can see him taking Ben's spot in a couple of months. I think Ben White is one of the players that we've not really been able to give a rest to because of his importance to the side. And even when Takahiro Tomiyasu has been available and not been used at left back, and there was an opportunity maybe to swap those 2 around and give Ben White a breather. Ben White's ability and calmness on the ball and ability to progress it, I think, has always made him so important in Mikel Arteta's eyes that he was reluctant to do that. Having Timber available does mean that you can give Ben White those breaks and breathers that he'll need, because he's just as good on the ball, if not, in my opinion, better. So I think he brings a lot. He played obviously at centre-back yesterday in the pre-season friendly, but I suspect that he'll play most of his football for Arsenal in the coming season as a fullback, just because our centre-back pairing is so formidable and so strong. Aiden says, if we sign Gyökeres, we probably won't sign a winger this summer. Maybe Jesus and Vieira will play as Saka backups. Do you think we should prioritise signing a winger or a striker? I think we could do with both. Okay, I really do. I think we could do with addressing both of those positions. But I also think it has to be the right player. And because I think we need to address both of those positions, I'm happy for us to leave one and prioritize the other based on the player. If it's an outstanding centre forward and you think he's the answer and a great fit for this team, then I'm fine with us prioritizing that over bringing in a winger. But if you find a winger who you think is a perfect fit, and that means not getting a centre forward, I'm fine. I think this is one that the market and the player available is going to dictate. Jesus, I expect Jesus to have a big season this year. I really, really do. I know it sounds like I'm piling the pressure onto him, but if you think back to his first season, he was incredible for Arsenal. And then the injury started to hit. And he spent, I think, the majority of last season when he was available trying to work his way back to his best. And we know he's a great dribbler. And we know that his sharpness and incisiveness around the penalty area is what makes him stand out from so many others. And he was just lacking that a little bit. With him having had a full preseason now, you hope, or hopefully by the end of it, he's had a full preseason, you'd hope that he'd be somewhere close to that again. And yeah, we'll see. But he's one that I'm really expecting to have a good and important campaign. So, yeah. Okay. I am going to take one more question before I leave. Got to get off to work. Rob says, do you think Calafiori and or Timber threaten Gabby Magalhaes's long-term position? Based on last season, no. Last season, he was our best defender for me. Better than Saliba. And I know a lot of people disagree with that at the time. But for me, he was outstanding last season. He really, really was. And I think that he is nailed on to start the new season. Over time, could they threaten his position? They're good enough players to do that, for sure. Does it give us the opportunity to give him a breather when we couldn't in the past? Yes, and that's a good thing. And that's what it is like, guys. We've been talking about this for a few weeks. It's about raising the floor of the squad rather than raising the ceiling too much further. We need to close the gap between our squad players and that first team that Mikel Arteta's trusted in for a good couple of years now. And yeah, look, for example, if we turned up at anywhere really in the Premier League and you knew that Gabby was unavailable, if this was last season, you'd be bricking it. You'd be thinking, Jakub Kiwior hasn't played much at centre-back, isn't really accustomed to working with William Saliba. There's still question marks around whether he's good enough for Arsenal, whether he's Arsenal level. And then all of a sudden, you got to throw him in a game like that. If you throw Jurriën Timber in there or Riccardo Calafiori, you probably feel a lot more comfortable. So it's about raising the floor of the squad. I think that's really, really important. And it feels like we're doing that this summer. Okay, guys, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you all so much for joining me. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode on something or another. We'll see what happens in the news over the next 24 hours or so. Make sure you leave a like if you're watching us on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Let's try and get to that 35K milestone on YouTube ASAP. If you're watching us on X, thank you. I can see there's over 700 of you with us live right now on X. Please come over to the YouTube channel or the podcast. It's really, really appreciated. And I'll see you all on the next one. Remember, we've got a like target. Let's hit it. All the best. Catch you all tomorrow. Goodbye.